Hi folks, so this video is going to be talking about design and including a visual component in terms of proposals. So we know that design is going to be really important when we think about genre because as we've noticed from the student examples and the skate park one, design is kind of everything. You know, there's different font sizes, there are different things bolded, there's bullet points. It looks a certain way and it's organized very logically. So thinking about the design is something um, formatted logically and linear, the structure is really going to make sense to someone and as well, and it can make more sense by including bold type fonts, italics, and visual components, kind of just to make sure that the audience really understands what we're trying to accomplish, and we're not hiding anything from them. Thinking about design as a whole is really important for your proposals, but also notice here how we need to really include a visual and multimodal component that is underneath the genre and as well as the development for audience. So visual or multimodal components can be some sort of picture, some sort of image. This can be a picture, it can be a figure, a chart, a graph, an illustration. We'll be talking about some potential possibilities, but just keep in mind during this video that design matters for the proposal as a whole, and we also need to include a visual multimodal component to it. So in thinking about design in general for our proposals, this is a kind of funny acronym called CRAP, but it really helps us think about four things that we can think about in terms of design, in terms of structuring our proposals. And if you want to compare this by the student examples or the skate park example, you can kind of think about how they're designing it and how well they align to these four different general ideas. So we've got contrast, repetition, alignment, and proximity. So contrast, we can notice that different section headings are offset by specific types, specific fonts and text sizes and things along those lines. Anything to notate different sections of the paper is going to, draw your reader's attention to a specific way. It's going to direct your reader's attention to a specific thing, I mean to say. Repetition is more so, like again, this talks to how we really need to be thinking about how we can logically structure our proposals. So if you have one section with bullet points that has 3 bullet points, they're all about the same length. You can kind of almost think about repetition as something like a resume you'd see. It looks linear and the same throughout. The paragraphs are indented. There's the same color for each section heading. Kind of things need to stay consistent as well. That's another good way of thinking about repetition. Alignment, this is getting in more into structural things. Just make sure that your proposals look as polished and clean in terms of alignment as possible. So everything is consistently placed. The section headings are all tabbed over. Everything is double spaced. Everything is 1-inch margins. The section headings are the same color. Things like that. And also proximity. So grouping similar items together. So for instance, this really gets interesting when we start to include images. We want those images to be close to whatever we're trying to talk about. So for instance, if you have a section talking about the costs, and you have a graph that shows how the costs are changing or how they will change, you're going to want to include those things together. So structure has to do a lot with linearity, logic, and grouping things together that makes sense. But as a whole, the construction and the design for the proposal needs to stay consistent. So now we're going to be shifting into something a little more specific, adding that specific visual component to our proposal. So something I'll say this is quoted directly from the assignment sheet: consider where your visual multimodal component will be most logical and most impactful in relation to the content of your proposal. So where is important, but also what you're including is going to be important. So what visuals are trying to accomplish is that they're really trying to aid your argument by providing a different mode of support. So you're proposing something, but sometimes, words have their limitations and we need to bring in a visual component, a graph, a chart, a figure, an illustration, something. You can represent statistics, you can represent ideas, trends, a location that you're thinking about. This happens a lot in the skate park one. That's an effective way. You only need to include one visual component, so don't overwhelm your paper with visuals. It only really needs one as a minimum to get your point across. So this is kind of just thinking about how to include visuals and a couple tips in general. Really always think about using them of good quality. Make sure that it's of the best quality, the highest. I can't think of the word right now, but the highest resolution. So you don't want anything distorted. You want your image to be there and be easily read. Something that's an appropriate size. I'll show you an example of something that I think is a little big or a little small where you can't really tell what's going on. And then make sure that if you are screenshotting things, you got to crop them to make sure that you're just getting the information that you need. I don't want to see your web browsers or things like that. It's got to be professional and polished and implemented correctly. So when we are thinking about including visuals in our proposals, we really want to think about visuals as a piece of evidence. They should be considered evidence where your words leave off and you believe that you can better explain something in a picture rather than just words. But I will say that it's important to have a combination of the visual and an explanation of the visual as well. Like any piece of evidence, you have to explain and develop it back to the main reason, which is here, you're trying to persuade someone to implement this proposal and the solution to this problem. So some things to consider. Some things to ask yourself when you're thinking about to include a visual and what visual you're thinking about including. What could be confusing and what could potentially be vague or misleading for your audience? What could really clarify things? What kind of visual could help clarify things if things are hard to figure out? This could be a graph, a chart, illustration, something that presents data, something that might be a little confusing in words. So start thinking about that and also ask yourself, what visuals have been most helpful to you during your research? So when you're reading a paper, what has really helped you understand the material? If it helped you understand things, it'll probably help yourself or help your reader understand. So just some things to keep in mind. So I'm going to kind of leave these next couple slides up because it really talks about kind of just some more stylistic things that go through and show how to include specific types of visuals. So I encourage you to read through these and pause it and take some notes, because if you want to include these specific visuals, you will be held accountable for following these guidelines that this video maps out. So I won't be talking too much over these, but these are just some things you can consider with including visuals. So tables are a good thing. If you want to compare individual values, sometimes specific numbers are very important to your reader, especially depending on what you're working with. So again, feel free to pause this and read through these at a slower pace, rather. So charts, graphs, and illustrations are great. They can be used when you want a quick way to express information, kind of a way to display overall data. So think about if you can find a place where you can display overall data and how that might be helpful. Also, illustrations are going to be important too, but only if the context calls for it. They aren't merely aesthetically appealing. That's important to consider because remember, we still have to develop every image that we put in there. Images are pieces of evidence. I'll say that again. I'm going to go back here. Treat your images as pieces of evidence that need to be developed in order to go back. They need to be developed for your reason, which is to persuade, to persuade someone, to convince someone to accept the solution that you're proposing and to implement that solution as well. So remember that things aren't just aesthetic here. They always have to serve a purpose for our larger purpose of the paper to convince. Talks about placement considerations. You want to, like I said, proximity is huge. You want to have them close to whatever it is they're referring to. And remember, we always have to explain our visuals as well. Text wrapping, if you have questions on that, play around with that a little bit. That's a way to kind of get the images to fit within your text. I've uploaded a worksheet as well that shows how you can kind of like how you can actually format figures in MLA. That's going to be under the modules section, and I highly recommend taking a peek at that as well. So here's an important kind of anomaly for how we cite visuals in MLA. It's kind of a weird thing. So if the source of the image is just something that we're getting for the image itself, then all we need to do is complete the citation underneath the illustration's caption, like happens here or here. So all we need to do is that. But if we use the image in the source, so say we get our graph that we choose to include our proposal from a research paper, a peer-reviewed research paper that we're using other information from, then we have to include the image in our works cited page. That's kind of confusing. So basically, if we're getting the source from or the image from a source that's all we're using, all we really need is the illustration's caption underneath the picture. But if we're getting that image from a source that we're referring to at other points in the paper, then the image must be in our works cited as well. And here's just a continuation on that thought about how to cite the picture correctly. And again, I put a worksheet up on modules that talks about this process as well. So I hope this video is helpful in terms of design and visuals, and please follow along now as I go over to, just bear with me 1 second, a couple examples. So here we have a student example that I haven't actually assigned yet, but it's online. And let's take a look at this implementation of a visual. So we're scrolling through and we have the second page here, and then we have this huge blank spot, and then the visual starts down here and it's huge. And it's labeled, which is nice, it's a figure, but it's enormous and there's all this white space on here. So as far as design goes, that's kind of inconsistent as well. So I encourage you to take a look at that. In the Chicago one, let's take a peek on what's happening here. So it's wrapped nicely, it's off to the side and it looks nice, but you can't read anything really. It's very small and it's really hard to kind of decipher what's actually going on or what the use of that image is. So just take that into consideration. For the skate parks one, we have a pretty small picture of a potential location. It's a little blurry. It doesn't really give a good feel of where things are at. Still, I'm struggling here a little bit. So just be sure to include high resolution pictures, and think about where they are and how big they are in relation to what the proposal looks like in general. All right, thanks.